Hey guys, Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC and BHSpringSolutions.com. This is the final session of the history portion of High Power University from BH Spring Solutions, and we have gone through in a lot of sessions now, adding a lot of information, filling in some gaps, making some clarifications where necessary. In the Wikipedia article, and this is for the Browning High Power. And in this session, we're going to take the Browning High Power's history from approximately 1989 until the Browning High Power was discontinued in right at the start of 2018. And we're going to. This period is rather simple because there was very little going on in this time frame, but in 1989, at least for Browning high powers coming into the United States, the Mark III version meant a suite of upgrades that became permanent. And this indicated that FN and Browning were really interested in bringing up to modern standards things about the high power that could otherwise hold it back from a competitive standpoint. In the Mark III version, dovetail sights became standard, which meant much easier press out, press in, alternative sights from adjustables to night sights. Ambi safeties became standard again, something that had been becoming more popular on modern firearms, and they did that. The original barrel's feed ramp had a kind of a hump or an arc to it, and that was straightened because it digests blunt-nosed modern hollow point ammunition more favorably. The drop safety sear lever, again, a la Leon Hubert, the designer of the SFS system and a lot of other high power things, the drop safety sear lever became standard because it's generally expected, or at least at that time, the argument was, if a handgun falls like this on the muzzle, it should not fire. And so the drop safety sear lever. Now, this was changes inside, back up one step from that. FN did not immediately adopt all of the Mark III components automatically, specifically the drop safety sear lever, which does take more metal out of the slide. One of their customers, Israel, did not like that design, and FN continued filling orders with the Type 1 sear lever, the non-drop safety type sear lever. The rationale for Israel was they are a very Condition 3, committed to Condition 3 carry, nothing in the chamber, even in their society, and of course in their military. Hence, they didn't see a need for a drop safety because they don't walk around with a round in the chamber. So for their situation, they felt that was more optimal. So the orders that FN sent to Israel after the Mark III came to be in 1989. Many of those we now know up to and as late as 1994. Those were still being produced. Those were Mark IIIs. FN used Mark IIIS when it included the drop safety sear lever, and the Mark III denoted, for the FNs anyway, all the other upgrades that we just mentioned. So this happened in 1989, and it was really the last of the any kind of major upgrades or advancements that ever happened to the high power after that. There were other things going on inside FN, and relative to the high power, this was an extremely rich design period. They were trying to save their bread and butter. What had been many years their bread and butter, or one of the things that buttered their bread better, was the high power pistol, and they were looking at all kinds of things. Leon Hubert was one of the main people that was involved in bringing the high power up to modern standards. And as an example, we've come to learn inside FN, they had developed a buffering recoil spring guide rod, a completely different approach than what BH Spring Solutions took, but they were playing with that idea of a buffering spring and a post out the end of the guide rod that would encounter the spring. Still didn't solve the fact that the spring was not replaceable inside, but they were, even in the 80s, they were going down this direction of betterments and advancements for the high power pistol. Completely rich design period, because they had a mission, but it never appeared that they got into sync about how the high power would be going forward into the future. They had almost more ideas than they had synchronicity inside their company about what direction that it was they were going to go. We saw in 2003, 2004, FN installed 5,000 SFS systems on their own high powers. And that was a interesting little blip on the radar screen that happened, but it also made the SFS a legitimate factory operating system when they did that. So the period of time from 1989 until the discontinuation became very non-eventful. Leon Hubert was still at FN until 1993. The 40 caliber high power was developed, but there was not much more going on because FN had effectively decided by 1993 that the high power would become obsolete inside of their company, and they made a decision in 1993 to allow Leon Hubert to leave and take a lot of the things that he had designed inside FN with him and continue marketing and continue selling these items. See, Leon Hubert was and is still today a believer in the high power design, a believer in the superiority of the high power design. He completely understands what my partner Slav and I experience week in and week out, every week. Contacts from folks who say, you know, I just got my first high power, and they start going on and on about how much they just enjoy this handgun. Everything about it. They love shooting it. They love the way it looks. They love just everything. And they come to us telling us this story, and this does not surprise us because we went into business first and foremost to optimize the high power pistol, because we had already become believers in just how superior this handgun design can be. And we still see this happening today. We have stories. One that is a classic one, a fellow that contacted us, and as a result of getting his first high power and getting some of our things and optimizing it and getting so enthused about how good this handgun is, he said he sold 25 plastic pistols he had in a collection and bought 8 high powers, and he said he's having the time of his life and he loves shooting these handguns. And it's a different experience than the mass-produced handgun that was designed to be able to be produced for a couple $100 and be able to be sold for $300 or $400 or $500. It's a very different. It's a very different experience when the handgun was designed and/or it's optimized to truly be optimal, not because you can produce one, a million of them with grip frames for $4 each. It is a different experience. This is a handgun that was made for the operator, made for the shooter. And the things that we see being done to this today that BHSpringSolutions is doing, these are very operator-oriented and focused kind of things. And so were the advancements in the Mark III version and the Mark III edition. The Arcus high powers, real quick. We may not have touched on this completely. The Careen Mark II and Mark III were made in Bulgaria. They were made at Arcus. And for those that are the purists that want to believe they were made in Israel, they were not. They were made in Lyaskovets, Bulgaria at Arcus Company, and they looked very similar to this Arcus 94. Israel decided to go ahead and go away from the high power design. They had developed a better CZ 75 called the Jericho, and Arcus continued making an Arcus 94, and this continued up until I believe the early 2000s, 2000, 2001 maybe time frame, and that was the last time that Arcus produced any Arcus 94 pistols. So those went away, and Browning continued, and the 40 got discontinued eventually, and then they continued up to 2018, 2010. They had an anniversary edition where they took and they engraved the top of the slide with 75th anniversary, and it almost seemed like FN was sort of committed or sentimental to this design. But the key thing to understand is in 1993, when FN did what they did and they allowed Leon Hubert to leave with literally all of the advancements that had been designed for the FN high power, at that point that was a no turning back kind of decision. Now, when you are the handgun of choice for 93 countries, you don't just walk away from the servicing efforts of that tomorrow. It took them 25 years, exactly. 25 years from the time that Leon Hubert left. They made that decision until they discontinued. It was 25 years to get, I guess, out from underneath the servicing responsibilities that they had to all of the countries and law enforcement and militaries that were carrying the Browning high power. You have some servicing obligations to those folks, obviously. The glaring thing, though, is when you realize that all of the real 21st century modifications that had been developed for the high power inside FN left, what that also meant was that FN had also, the die was cast that they were not going to be helping their existing customers modernize these handguns, which that's a bit harsh way to think about it, but it's also reality. Many of these militaries and law enforcement agencies could have upgraded these handguns with ambidextrous controls, Picatinny rail, light capabilities, advanced sight capabilities. A lot of things that you would want on your modern handguns that some of these customers could have done with many of these things, but those things left FN. But they did continue to service their existing customers for those 25 years, and our understanding is even today, any of those customers can make a parts order for their high powers that are still using them, and they can get an order handled. So that's basically how it went from 1993 until 2018. For FN and Browning, it was very, very uneventful, but they still had these servicing obligations everywhere else in the world, and they kept on bringing into the United States what we understand about 2,500 high powers a year for the last several years that they brought those into the United States. About 20% of that all was sold to one kind of a high-end custom shop. And so, in essence, they really weren't trying. It was just kind of, they were keeping it, in the catalog because they still have these things, these servicing responsibilities in a lot of places in the world, so it stayed in the Browning catalog. Some other things that we haven't talked about too much. There was a point, and this was started back in the 70s. There was a round invented called the 41 AE, or the 41 Action Express. And it has some characteristics in terms of the cartridge that makes it rather easy to get handguns that were designed for a 9mm to feed this 41 Action Express cartridge. And there was an attempt to do that with the Browning High Power, and even today, even on Gunbroker, you'll see occasionally high powers with a 41 AE conversion barrel. Everything that we have seen from that was too much for the grip frames and the slides of the Browning High Power, and the 41 AE very, very fast fell out of popularity. But again, that's just an example. Even Browning and FN, they were interested in things that they could do like that, to chamber the high power for different calibers, that would give it that appeal that you only get from a variety of different calibers. In the last several years, in the last 20-25 years, there have been multiple different companies that have been making high-end custom high powers, and these are your $2,500, $3,500, $4,500, very, very what I would call tricked out high powers. And those are a kind of a different segment of the marketplace, but the high power has that appeal. It has the aesthetic appeal that lends itself to this highly refined customization efforts. The FN and Browning, for years, the engravers, the hand engravers in Liège, which Liège, Belgium, for years, for a long time was famous for, made $4,000 and $5,000 and $6,000 and $10,000 high powers that are just masterpiece works of art. I mean, you almost wonder how anybody could ever shoot one of these, pistols that looks like this. These belong in an art gallery because of their exquisite attention to detail. And then the last chapter of the high power history that we're going to talk about very briefly is the high power clone that was introduced right about the same time that Browning discontinued and FN discontinued the high power, XVI Regent BR9 from Turkey. And this is one that BHSpringSolutions has done now about 8,600 rounds of testing with that handgun. That is, there's an interesting thing about that high power, although it is and it's not a high power. That is the only high power that we know of that was ever produced and machined as an effort of reverse engineering, and it shows the BR9 shows those limitations that there are for reverse engineering. Everything else that's been made in all the different countries, our understanding is that manufacture, that production was done from blueprints that originated at FN, not necessarily the actual FN high power blueprints, but blueprints that did originate from and were provided from by FN. The XVI Regent BR9, it has an interesting story because the deficiencies, the defects out of the box are correctable, and it appears that you can get very, very good function from it. We have, but it is as far as we know the world's first attempt to make a reverse engineered high power pistol, and the other thing that's also interesting, what we've seen in this high power history since 2018. In 2019, many months, the Browning high power led sales on gunbroker.com for used handguns. That's just a crazy story. The Browning high power. At any given time, there's 300-400 of these handguns on Gunbroker, and there's like 20,000 Glocks. And the Browning High Power to lead sales of used handguns in 2019 many months is just something, when you think about it. The values of the FN Browning High Powers and many of the clones have been increasing and increasing. You could measure these increases by the month because they have been going up in value so fast. The TISOS Regent BR9 selling at a price point in the United States of $500 to $550. This is completely fictitious. I mean, it's real that you can buy them for that, but it's all happened only because of just a completely bogus exchange rate between the United States dollar and the Turkish lira. And if it were not for that, there's no possible way we would have ever seen those versions of the high power brand new at $500 like we did. So this is going to complete our history portion. That brings us up to about 2020 as we're making these sessions for High Power University. And in the next sessions, we're going to be going into a lot of detail about some specifics just all over the high power handgun. We're going to go into details about parts and differences between the models and things that you can encounter when customizing or optimizing these handguns. Thank you for joining us for the history portion of High Power University. I'm Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC and BHSpringSolutions.com.